This is BIA, Becoming in Action, a space to explore the lifelong journey of growth as leaders, as professionals, and as human beings. Through honest conversations and lived experience, we evolve with courage and intention. Here's your host, Sandy Abear.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I just finished reading Yesteryear, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about the main character, Natalie. Not because I see myself in her story, our lives are very different, but because I recognize something in the way she sees herself. Natalie was raised in a very traditional, fundamental religious environment. The beliefs she learned as a child didn't just shape her values, they shaped the way she interpreted everything. They became the lens through which she saw herself and other people and the world. And what struck me most wasn't her upbringing. It was that even as an adult, long after her life had changed, she was still living through that same lens. Outwardly, she appeared capable, intelligent, composed. Internally, she was relentlessly critical, especially of herself. And when I closed the book, I realized I wasn't only thinking about Natalie. I was thinking about me. Not because our experiences are the same, but because I know what it feels like to carry a lens that was installed long before I had a say in it. And lately, I've been thinking a lot about how do you separate the person you truly are from the story you were taught to believe about yourself. That tension between inherited beliefs and authentic identity. Looking back now, I don't think I was a difficult child. I definitely went through some very difficult things. And I think I was a child who desperately needed help learning how to regulate my emotions. I wasn't very confident. I wasn't very sure of myself. And I had a pretty negative self-view. And while there were certainly people who loved me, many of the messages I internalized were about what was wrong with me. I was too emotional, too sensitive, too much. And instead of learning, you're safe, you're okay, let's figure this out together, I often received messages that something was wrong with me. I came to believe that if I could just fix myself enough, maybe then I would finally be enough. And those messages don't just disappear. They become the way you interpret yourself. As I got older, around when I was 13 and in 7th grade, I became very good at projecting something different. I learned to be competent, responsible, successful, reliable. From the outside, I think people often experience someone who was confident. But on the inside, the old story never really changed. And there's still this strange gap between what other people experience when they meet me and what I instinctively believe about myself. That's the part that's so exhausting. Because compliments don't always land. Success doesn't always register. Love doesn't always feel believable. It's almost as if the evidence comes in, but it gets filtered through an old operating system that says, yes, but. Yes, but you're still not enough. Yes, but don't get comfortable. Yes, but they'll eventually see the real you. I've been thinking about why that happens. I renovated the exterior, but I never questioned the blueprint. For years, I thought of these beliefs as reality. Now I'm beginning to realize they were a prescription. When I think about lenses, I usually think about lenses in a pair of glasses. But I don't think our childhood lenses work that way. They're more like contact lenses. Now, I've never worn contact lenses, but I imagine when you first start wearing them, you're super aware that they're in your eye. And then after a while, your brain forgets about them and you stop feeling them. You stop thinking about them. You don't look out and say, I'm looking through contact lenses. You simply believe this is what the world looks like. I think that's exactly what happens with the stories we inherit as children. They become so integrated into the way we see ourselves that we forget their interpretations. We think they are reality. Psychologists actually have different names for this. Attachment researchers call them internal working models. Schema therapists call them schemas. Acceptance and commitment therapy talks about cognitive fusion, where our thoughts become so intertwined with our identity that we stop recognizing them as thoughts. Neuroscientists talk about predictive processing, which is the idea that our brains aren't simply reacting to reality. They're constantly predicting it based on our past experiences. Different fields, different language, the same idea. Our brains build a model of the world from our earliest experiences, and over time, that model starts to feel like the truth. That's why compliments don't always land. That's why criticism sticks. That's why we can have people who genuinely love us and still feel like we're not enough. The lens filters everything. I've realized one of the biggest ways this shows up in my own life is where I put my attention and consequently my energy. I think about it like traffic lights. There are green lights, people who genuinely see me, relationships where I don't have to perform, work that feels aligned, conversations that leave me feeling energized instead of drained. And then there are red lights, the people who never quite approve, the opportunities that require me to become someone I'm not, the relationships where I'm always trying to explain myself or earn my place. And here is what fascinates me about myself. When I encounter a red light, my instinct isn't to register or acknowledge that it's red. My instinct is instantly to go into effort mode to make it turn green. Maybe if I work harder, maybe if I achieve more, maybe if I explain myself better, maybe if I become just a little bit different. And I have spent so much of my life believing that if something requires more effort, it must be more valuable. And I even talked about this in an episode previously on effort versus ease. But I think I understand it differently now. Maybe that belief wasn't wisdom. Maybe it was my childhood prescription. Somewhere along the line, I learned that love had to be earned, that belonging had to be earned, that acceptance had to be earned. So naturally, I became someone who tried really hard. And there's a scene from one of my favorite movies, The Family Stone, that suddenly makes so much more sense to me. Meredith is trying really hard to fit in with this family. Every word is calculated. Every interaction feels like an audition. You can almost feel how exhausted she is. And finally, she reaches a breaking point and says, I try so hard. And then quietly says something so simple. I wish you wouldn't. And I've always loved that line, but I don't think I understood it until now. Because I think I've spent a lot of my life trying so hard, trying to prove myself, trying to be enough, trying to convince people, trying to earn belonging, trying to turn red lights into green ones? And what if the answer isn't trying harder? What if the answer is noticing where the green lights already are? The people who don't require me to prove myself, the friendships that feel easy, the work that brings energy instead of depletion, the opportunities that feel like alignment instead of performance. And I don't mean that life should always be easy. Growth takes effort. Building a business takes effort. Learning takes effort. Healing takes effort. But there's a profound difference between effort that helps us grow and effort spent trying to convince someone of our worth. One expands us, the other slowly erodes us. So how do we change the prescription we've been wearing for decades? The research is actually surprisingly hopeful. The first step isn't ripping the lens out. It's realizing you're wearing one. Instead of saying, I'm not enough, you begin to notice I'm having the thought that I'm not enough. That tiny shift creates space. Then we become curious. Where did I learn this? Who taught me this? Was it true then? Is it true now? We begin looking for evidence that doesn't fit the old story. Not because we're pretending everything is wonderful, but because our brains are naturally wired to confirm what they already believe. If my old story says I'm not enough, I'll collect evidence to support that all day long. Healing means teaching my brain to notice different evidence, to notice the green lights. And one of the most powerful ways we do that is through safe relationships. Sometimes someone else needs to believe in us before we can believe in ourselves. A coach, a therapist, a mentor, a friend, someone who keeps reflecting back a version of ourselves that our old prescriptions simply can't see yet. Eventually, the brain begins to update. Not because the past disappeared, but because the present has offered enough new evidence to build a better model. Maybe that's what reinvention really is. Not becoming someone new, not pretending that the past didn't happen, but recognizing that the prescription you needed at 8 years old may not be the prescription that serves you at 54. Maybe it's time for an eye exam. Maybe it's time for a new prescription. Maybe it's time to stop trying so hard to make red lights turn green, and instead turn towards those green lights, toward the people who see you, toward the opportunities that fit, toward the places where you don't have to audition for belonging, toward the life that asks you to become more fully yourself instead of someone else entirely. Change always involves loss. Every beginning requires an ending. You can't create space for something new if you're still holding on to everything that came before it. And I've been realizing that some of what I'm grieving isn't something I actually had. It's the life I imagined I would have, the expectations I carried, the stories I told myself about how things were supposed to unfold. I'm also grieving relationships that were sustained by my overgiving. Relationships where my value came from what I did rather than who I was. And as I stop overfunctioning, some of those relationships naturally are changing, and some may even end. That can feel like loss, but maybe it's also making room for relationships built on mutual care instead of constant effort, making room for opportunities that don't require me to prove my worth, making room for a life that fits who I am today instead of who I thought I needed to be. So lately I've been repeating a simple mantra. I am losing what no longer serves me to make room for what I truly need. Not every loss is a mistake. Sometimes loss is simply the space where something more aligned is waiting to grow. So as you move through your day or week, you might want to ask yourself a few questions. What prescription am I looking through? Where did it come from? What evidence am I overlooking because it doesn't fit my old story? Where am I exhausting myself trying to turn a red light green? And where are the green lights I've been walking right past because they felt too easy to trust? And that's what I'm learning right alongside you. Thanks for listening. See you next time.